That was an awesome talk and a fantastic segue to what I'm going to be talking about. So, for us, the end game is not the end game. Even after, and I'm also going to be talking about Colonial Pipeline, so there's some similarities in our content. So, for us, we take security and data protection very seriously. Not recently, but from 2014. We were designed for data security and data protection. We have a saying that if your data is secure, your business is secure. Just to put some credence to not just the talk, the CIA's CISO is now our CISO. And we now have Chris Krebs. I'm sure everybody has heard of Chris Krebs. He's now joined the chair of our CISO advisory board. So we have some just justifiable street cred from experts to back our position. There's a ransomware attack in 2021 every 11 seconds. And that's halving this year. Infrastructure security is very important. If infrastructure security solved the problem, this wouldn't happen. But ransomware still gets in. It's usually a weak point, a human, socially engineered, some credentials are gotten, or some method of penetrating the network, and the data gets corrupted, despite all the defense in depth that you may have. Now, to talk about the anatomy of a ransomware attack, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, everybody knows exactly the anatomy. But first off, somebody clicks a button, releases some credentials, allows an attacker into the network. They traverse the network, map, escalate, and discover. That's the first crime. The second crime is they find all the important data, the stuff that they could charge you for to get back, or could damage you if it's released, and they exfiltrate that. That's the second crime. What is now common is if you could just restore from your backups, the ransomware wouldn't be paid, and they just do a restore and we're done. So what they're targeting is your backups. If they can delete your backups, then they truly have you hostage. They've got your data, they're going to encrypt your data, and you can't recover your data. What are you going to do? So just before they turn off the lights and leave, they encrypt everything and leave a ransom note. Okay? This is the end game. This is what happened to Colonial Pipe, but this is not their end game. So, when ransomware attacks, you have two options. One is you pay the ransom. You may or may not get the key. It may or may not work. And it may be, in Colonial Pipeline's example, just a quick backstory, they had Bitcoin in the bank, ready to pay. They had ransomware response plans, incident plans, tabletop exercises, a whole bunch of preparedness. They were instructed by the government to pay the ransom so the Bitcoin could be traced to find who did the penetration. They didn't have to pay the Bitcoin, they had us. So what would normally happen is you attempt a recovery. Now, the recovery starts a multi-step process that involves IT ops, they're the people that bring the backup back, and SecOps, who validate that the recovered data is safe and ready to go back into production. The challenge is, how do you know that the backup isn't also still containing that ransomware? Saudi Aramco were hit by a ransomware, and they recovered a bad copy. They immediately kicked off the encryption again, so they went back further, and it happened cycle on cycle on cycle, because they didn't know when the ransomware entered, so they didn't know how far to wind back the business. And if you had to go back recover your business from 2 weeks ago, 45 days ago, there are many businesses globally that fold after a ransomware attack because they cannot recover and they've lost too much financial and data. So we need to find a point where the ransomware is not in your backup. It needs to be resilient. You need to be able to catch the ransomware, you need to find the ransomware, discover the blast radius, find the cause of the ransomware, do some threat hunting, then recover the data without the ransomware, so you don't go on and on. Now in Colonial Pipeline's case, they had a clean, at the end of every rack, there's a rack that's not connected to the network, they call it the doomsday rack, and that's a clean, known state good, not connected to the network, that they could recover from if they had to. Lots of customers don't have end-of-rack infrastructure ready for a recovery. So all they're left with is recovering the data, looking to see if it's clean or not, try it again, rinse and repeat. And that can take a very long time. So we have, as I said, and you'll see a slide shortly, since 2014, we've been focused on data protection and data security. We are not replacing infrastructure security. It's another layer of defense. You still need your infrastructure security, and traditionally, infrastructure security has been to prevent server attacks, denial of a service, bringing your business down, disrupting your business. It's only recently that the criminals have pivoted to a more ransomware-based exfiltrate the data and then charge you for the data if we don't release it, if you don't pay the ransom. So in our data security component, we guarantee that the data is resilient, and there are methods that I'll go into. What is the data telling us? We mine the data to find the blast radius, the ransomware, the indications of compromise, and the actual strain of the attack. And then we quarantine that file, all those files, and in the recovery, we don't have to recover an entire, for example, a VMDK, not restoring an entire VMDK, because at scale, that's very long. We're not even restoring files. We can restore files, we can restore VMDK, but what we can do is incrementally put back the disk blocks back into the VMDK, so it's an incremental recovery of just the encrypted data to an unencrypted state without the ransomware. So no matter where your data is, whether it's on-premises, in the cloud, a SaaS, all these things work in exactly the same fashion with a common tool set, a common look and feel. You're not learning many different tools across AWS. Is slightly different to Azure, which is slightly different to GCP, which is different to all the other clouds. So we are cyber-proof data protection with a logical air gap that's immutable, can't be changed, and it has a redundant copy of your data. We continuously monitor for ransomware. We'll detect an encrypting event. We'll give you 0 false positives. If we just looked at the change files, new files, and deleted files, you might be commissioning a new server. You may be decommissioning a server. We don't want to give you false alerts. So what happens with our approach is we have a list of files that have been changed. We then look inside those files and say, has the internal entropy altered? Is the noise increased? Is it encrypted? That way too, we can say, these are new files and these are encrypted files. So we know the blast radius. We don't do that on production data, because if it's not encrypted, you're going to slow it down by looking at whether it's encrypted or not. We look at this after we've taken a copy. While we're doing that, why not open the file and look for credit card numbers, tax file numbers, personal identifiable information, national IDs, or words like bomb, sell, fire, put. For legal matters, we look inside the data and can report on what that is, what we've found. We have a customer, I'm from Australia, I talk funny. We have a customer in Australia that every backup, they can say that they're PCI compliant, because after the backups happen, they look for the credit card numbers. They look for account numbers, bank account details. And so whenever they get a PCI audit, it's immediately, yes, we are PCI compliant. We can do that for any regulatory requirements. We just need to be able to open the file and look for patterns. We're doing it for encryption. We'll do it for the rest of the important data. While we're looking inside the files for encryption, sensitive data, why not look for the threats as well? So when we look for threats, when we do threat hunting, proactively or reactively, we can look for file name, pattern matching. We can look for file hashes. Neither of those things work if the ransomware morphs when it lands or when it executes. So then we look inside the files and we use Yara rules to look for basically a recipe of what makes up the ingredients of a ransomware. And so we can distinguish the difference between Log4j, Ryuk, Hafnium, all the different strains of viruses by just Yara rules, which are basically often a very short text file of look for this hex in these locations. We need these matches coupled with these things. So we can do that all in the protected data that we have to confirm that it's safe and clean. Then if we find a threat, we'll quarantine it so it can be recovered with a 2-person rule for forensic analysis, but out of the box, you can't recover malware when you do a restore. Something else I was going to say. Surgically recovering, incremental restored, quarantined. Okay. So this is a small history. So Rubrik has been around for 8 years. I've been in Rubrik for 6 of those. Started off as SE, now APAC Platform Solution Architect. I get to travel, which is great, now that we can travel. When we started with a zero trust idea. From the very beginning, our backups were immutable, append only, and invulnerable to corruption. We'll protect the encrypted corrupt data, but it will have zero impact on the previous copy. They're all independent, but they're all deduped against each other, so we don't need a lot of storage. We provide instant recovery, and all the data that we store is not discoverable, visible, or alterable on the network. So if you can't see it, you can't break it. And the policies that we use to protect the data are incredibly simple. So basically we started with a clean sheet of paper and went, what did everybody else do wrong? Let's fix that. Okay. So shortly after we came out of stealth, the first global customer is in Australia, and I've got an example of them later. So we introduced the same capabilities no matter where your data is. So whether it's in the cloud, IaaS or SaaS, same resiliency, same capabilities, same granular recovery, same orchestration, all the components. And then more recently, we won Best of Show a couple of years ago in security at VMworld. Traditionally, up until that point, we were a backup company. People saw us as a backup company. We released ransomware remediation. It was just a logical progression. We're looking inside the files. We may as well keep looking. And we won Best of Show for ransomware remediation. We also, while we're looking in the files, the sensitive data discovery and monitoring and the threat hunting. All from investigating, getting business value out of data that's protected that used to be dead on tape and useless if the tape wasn't broken, lost or damaged. So the things that you want to know for resilience is it safe? Can it be compromised? Can it be seen? Can it be modified? Can it be tampered with? Rubrik has a retention lock that says if you back it up for a year, you can't make it 1 day. You can make it 2 years, it can get longer, but it can't get shorter. If you enable the 2-person rule, so 2 people have approved on separate terminals with separate login credentials, and those credentials, mandatory MFA and native time-based one-time passwords. So nobody's going to be able to share passwords and get access. So if they do approve a reduction in retention, we also, and then enable the intelligent data lock. So even if it does get deleted, we'll keep the data for an extra 7 days to give you time. And we'll report on that through the dashboard. As I mentioned, our backups and data is not discoverable by NFS or SMB. So it's logically air-gapped. Everything's encrypted, has to be, in transit and at rest, immutable by design from the ground up. with an append-only file system. For data observability, what malware do we have? What sensitive data is there? Has there been any unusual deletions or activities? And on that point, the further roadmap capabilities that we can deliver. I'm not going to mention them, but there's some more stuff coming around looking at what's been unusual deletions and activity on files. Are there any indications of compromise? Can we find any ransom notes that haven't been triggered from the ransomware? We provide a dashboard of what's changed, what's new, the continuously looking for sensitive data, and indications of compromise that give you a clue to the nature of what threat attacked your system. For recovery, the last thing you want to do is be able to recover the ransomware file, the malware. You don't want to reinfect yourself. So we need to make sure that it's surgical in its recovery. Surgical just for not the threat, but also for the speed of the restore. We don't want to have to restore thousands of VMDKs across the network when we could just restore a couple of hundred disk blocks or 1,000 files. And as I mentioned, and Saudi Aramco have positively experienced, you don't want to reintroduce the malware and be encrypted all over again. So you need a clean, that's something I was going to mention, in the recovery, we internally have a clean room state where we look at this data and without getting anywhere near production storage. We can look at it, quarantine it, so you don't have to recover it, then inspect it, and then do it again. You can just look at the backups and know, yes or no, and then do the recovery straight away. On that threat hunting, you can do proactive threat hunting as well as reactive threat hunting. Reactive is after the malware. Proactive is, there's a zero-day exploit, log4j has been announced, are we vulnerable? Can you go and find me, are our libraries vulnerable to log4j? That's a proactive threat. We can go and hunt for that, and then we know what with our exposure and what has to be fixed for that. And you don't have to check 1,000 systems on 1,000 days of backup. You look for one system until you find it, and then once you found it, you go, right, we have a hit, look wider or look deeper. So you can start simple and expand. Again, dashboards, we have automated recovery, so we can use this. And there used to be a DR plan, disaster recovery plan. This is a disaster recovery plan, but it's also a ransomware response plan, because you can have orders of systems that you want to protect in a particular way and to recover in a certain order, and not back onto production, but recover it back into DR. And we can do that either by pre-staging data, so all we got to do is spin it up, or we can replicate it and then make it available for restore if needed. So we can bring it up and then shut it down. We can fail it over and live, and then when production comes back, we can fail it back. Or we can just delete it and continue on our day for testing. Or via blueprints, pre-built workflows, so it makes life very easy. Everything I've said for on-premises, in the cloud, works exactly the same for Microsoft 365. It's all logically air-gapped, it's immutable, it's granular, it's fast, and it's easy. There's no extra tools. The same tool that you use to protect a Windows file server is also a VM, there's also a SQL online, and there's also Microsoft 365. Same retention lock, same easy policy. So, in summary, with data protection and data security, you've got full zero trust capabilities. Now with Rubrik, when a ransomware happens, we find it, we investigate it, we find the threat and the sensitive data that may have leaked, we quarantine the threat, we do the restore, and you're done. That's what we did for Colonial Pipe. We had everything back up in 8 hours. The challenge was when you shut down a manual system across the country, things have to be re-inspected manually before you can turn valves back on. Otherwise you risk disruption, and unexpected physical disturbances. Our NASCAR slide, we call it. You'll see some logos that you may recognise. These are our customers. We have a large number of Fortune 500 customers that all trust us to protect them. Lang's Building Supplies have been hit multiple times. These are the first global customer. Sadly, multiple times with ransomware. They've never had to pay a cent. They've recovered their primary systems in 25 minutes and all of their systems in an hour. No data loss, no payment of the ransom. And we back that with real money, $5 million for ransomware warranty. If you use us and follow our security hardening best practices and keep that up to date, and you get hacked and can't recover the data, we'll hand over some money to help recover. And we've never had to pay that because we're invulnerable to ransomware. So for Colonial Pipe, endgame was not endgame. It was just another step they've got to go through. So if anybody wants to know more about Rubrik, we also have a booth. We can do demonstrations of all these capabilities and go into more detail on anything you might want to know. So thank you for your time.
All right, that indeed was a great session on addressing the best practices for constructing cyber resiliency.